At Martech have what we call the Martech Emotion Score. So it's our way of essentially determining the net level of pleasantness of emotion. So it's really similar to an NPS, which is, promoters minus detractors, gives us how often people are going to be recommending a brand, product, or service. So we do a similar thing with emotions. When you translate it to numbers and metrics, it helps leaders to wrap their heads around it a little bit more and show why it matters. And it's not just some fluffy kind of stuff that's nice for marketing or creative. It's a real business challenge and there are real business implications as well.
Welcome to Bullhorns Bullseyes with Curtis Hays and Tom Nixon. The podcast where precision meets promotion. Let's ride. The most dangerous sentence in business is not, we don't know our customer. It's, we already do. Or we do. We're certain we do. Or we don't have to ask because we know. That's a lot of sentences, Curtis. But it reminds me, building off of our episode last week with Will, where we talked about purchase decisions being emotional, which I think most people don't intuit that. I think they think they're logical, especially in the B2B world, is that people compare benefits, features, they rationalize a purchase, when really, I think Will would say and did say that it's anything but that.
He did. And I can relate to a story. I just had a conversation with a business owner who we were looking at some of their data. They have a two-step process on how they get customers. The first is you have to meet a certain profile, so they really know their ICP, but their ICP has to be a certified professional in this very specific thing in order to buy their products and services. And so there's a 1-foot fence that people have to jump. But if they get through that 1-foot fence, they're obviously qualified. Once they get those, they're really struggling to convert those because they're not customers yet. They just signed up to potentially purchase. Once they do sign up, they can't figure out why they can't move the conversion rate. So they're moving their conversion rate on new signups, but they're not improving their conversion rate to purchase. And here I sat across the table from a business owner who is thinking about pricing strategy, discounting strategy, all these other things. And I said, wait, pause. When was the last time you talked to your customer? When was the last time you really understood why they buy from you? And what would happen if you put out a survey to all these people who haven't purchased, who have signed up? They're in your market. They've given you their information. Why don't you ask them why they haven't made that first purchase? And what would you uncover? My bet would be potentially something that is more emotional than it is economical. But I don't know. What do you think?
I think you're exactly right. The question isn't, or my answer isn't, I can't answer what do I think because I don't know. And I think that's the theme of this whole episode. And what we've been espousing for the last year and a half now is that you don't know what you don't know. And so how do you figure out what you don't know? You bring in an expert to go find out what you don't know. And that's what we did today, because there's lots of things that you and I don't know, Curtis, but we rely on the experts who do. And so we would like to welcome back a return guest, with all full disclosure, a client, but a friend and an expert, and that is Emily Bielak. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Emily. And you are a director with the Martech Group. So welcome back to the Bullhorns Bullseyes podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be back today. Looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully you can shed some light on this because, we started the season by framing just a common problem that Curtis and I see, which is this marketing drift where you're either your customer's drifting away from you or you're drifting away from strategy. And as we think about the customer drifting away from our brand or our company and its potential customers, as Curtis pointed out, not just your existing customers, there's typically this blind spot or this black hole where you don't know why what's happening is actually happening. And I think too many companies make these presumptions that either they know what's happening or they'd rather talk about these things that are rational because they think that the customer is either purchasing or purchasing on some sort of rationality, when really Will Leach was here telling us, no, it's anything but that, in fact, it's almost always emotional, even if it's a very B2B cut and dry transactional type of purchase. Is that what you found as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Daniel Kahneman said about 96% of decisions are made automatically. So irrationally, emotionally, not a lot of logic or analytical thinking going into them. That's 4% of emotion. So in our line of work, we commonly get, clients or people who come to us with those similar business challenges of, why am I not converting? I've had people sign up and then I lose them and they just don't know. Sometimes the simple answer is let's talk to them and figure it out. This doesn't have to be some Herculean effort. It just has to be, a concentrated, specific set of questions where we can go talk to people and understand more about what's going on in their mindset, in their journey, that kind of leads them to drop off, for example, to continue Curtis's example.
Do you have a sense for this? Is something that I'm curious about. Why do you think there might be reticence on the part of leadership to want to go through this process? I mean, it seems so logical to just say, well, let's go ask people and they'll tell us and we can use that information. Why do you think that happens, that friction, and how do you help companies overcome that?
Yeah, good question. So I think sometimes emotions are perceived as fluffy, right? Like, okay, great, we know how they feel, but what does that really mean for us? And so I think it's important to understand that not only understanding how customers or any particular set of audience or set of people feels, but understanding that you as a brand, product, service, whatever, can also, make them feel other things too. So that might help to purchase, create more purchase triggers or create some behavior that you're looking for. So I think that that's important. But I think we kind of capture leaders' attention a little bit more when we talk about ways that we have to quantify this. So we at Martech have what we call the Martech Emotion Score. So it's our way of essentially determining the net level of pleasantness of emotion. So it's really similar to an NPS, which is, promoters minus detractors, gives us, how often people are going to be recommending a brand, product, or service. So we do a similar thing with emotions where we can quantify. And then we also like to do this, among different groups of people or segments or personas. We like to do it at different stages of the journey. We like to compare it, a brand versus a category. So if you're, or brand versus competitors, all of those types of things. I think, when you translate it to numbers and metrics, it helps leaders to wrap their heads around it a little bit more and show why it matters. And it's not just some fluffy kind of stuff that's nice for marketing or creative. It's a real business challenge and there are real business implications as well.
So I'm wondering, back to your example, what was the feedback? Was there pushback when you said, let's just go ask customers why they are or are not buying?
Well, I don't want to pick on this person's specific example, but generalizing, I think, particularly when it comes to research in these surveys, what I'm seeing, and this is a question for you, Emily, is like the reports sound great to the business owners or leaders in general. Yeah, I'd love to have that information. But I've done research like this before, and it just sits in a filing cabinet after it's done. Like nobody ever takes action on it. And so, what do you guys recommend, or what do you see clients who are successful in taking this data and applying it to prove out revenue? I mean, ultimately, that being the goal is to say, okay, how do we take this information, understand it, implement it, test it, not just blindly implement it, but test it, see if it works, and then see how it's moving the needle from a revenue perspective, and learn from that, and then compound. Because I feel like these are really opportunities to really scale, right? I mean, we talk about this in social media and different things all the time. It's like, what's the hook? And it's like, why are we pretending trying to test and come up with the hook in a social ad or an organic post? We can figure out the hook by going and talking to our customer, and then not ask AI what the four hooks best opportunities are, right? Let's figure out what's going to resonate through the data and then go and put that data into action. So what do you see, Emily, to that? Or what would you say to that business owner who's like, it sounds good, but I've done this before, and those are just sitting in a filing cabinet back here. Our team doesn't do anything with that research.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing would be find a more strategic partner next time, right? So you need somebody that is not just going to be like a data dump of, okay, here's what we learned, see you later, like I did my job. You need somebody that will help to translate those findings into obviously actionable steps you can take. What's a roadmap? What are some, 30, 60, 90-day things? What are some 12-month, 18, 24-month things that we can do? But more specifically, I think occasionally we see clients that fall into this trap of learning a lot about their customer base and then coming up with strategies, but trying to use those strategies on the wrong segments. So, this is why segmentation is really, really so important. And it's the foundation really of a lot of the customer work that we do. Because if you don't know the segments, you're doing yourself a disservice. You're not going to be able to more precisely fine tune messaging or personalize an online experience, for example, for a group of people where, that's just not going to work for them. And coming back to emotions, we've done a lot of customer journey work looking at different segments that are, going through the same journey, but they might have very different experiences and they might have very different emotions throughout that journey. Something like being put on a wait list could be extremely aggravating for one segment, but it could be like really no big deal for another segment. So, understanding the different segments and their emotions and how they're going to behave at different points of the journey is imperative to having a great strategy for designing a customer experience or a journey or messaging or marketing, all of these things, because otherwise you're just kind of putting a square peg in a round hole. You know what I mean?
And I know we had you on the first season to talk about segmentation. I think we maybe covered this, but when you talk segmentation, are you talking ideal customer profile? Is that kind of what you're saying, or kind of explain what the difference is? Because I know you guys take segmentation to a different level than just ICP.
Yeah. So ICP is just that, right? Your ideal customer profile. So you might have segments that are not, in your ICP, but they still interact with your brand, product, service for whatever they still need to buy whatever you're selling, right? So um, understanding usually it shakes out in a way where there is one ICP. Say we have 3 to 5 segments, typically 4 or 5. One of them might be your specific ICP, but knowing about the other ones is also very, very important. So we just did, for example, a segmentation for a company that makes barbecue products, and we found that one of their segments, it was a small portion, small population size, basically fit exactly their ICP right now. But because it was such a small, less than 10% of their population, of the, population we studied, that means there's, 90% out there that we have to figure out, can we capture this audience? Say we can't capture 50%, for example, that means we've got 40% that, with the right messaging, with the right marketing tactics, with the right product, let's not forget the implications for product development and innovation. Maybe they're, only buying barbecue sauces and not seasonings. Maybe we want to get that, 20% that's only buying barbecue sauces. Maybe we need to introduce new products to them. So there's a lot of ways that you can look at an audience and segmentation that make it really actionable from like a product development, a marketing, a messaging perspective that go beyond just here's our core customer base today. It's thinking, who can we get in addition to who we have today?
And I think going back to the opening where I said, what's more dangerous, saying we know our customer or admitting that you don't. And the for the folks that say, well, we know our customer, I feel like there's a tendency to put everyone into this monolith and say, well, our customer, because they think about their ideal customer, which is probably only 10% of who they're actually capturing, but they think about this perfect client and they describe a certain type of person that buys because of a specific need that's based on rationality and not emotion. And it's at this specific point in time. And going back to Will Leach, because I love that conversation, there's more complexity there because there's all sorts of different types of customers, as you just mentioned, that may not be ideal. There's different mind states at different points in this journey. and you're only capturing the person I just used as the straw man is only capturing the person at the point of purchase, which is at the end of the journey and not at the beginning. So there's this whole like complexity of timeline, various segments and cohorts, then mapping various emotional states throughout. And that's more than just saying, here's your ideal customer and here's 5 or 6 attributes about that person, right? One of the things that I know that you and I have talked about offline is this fascinating to me, this, for example, this peak end theory. So explain what peak end theory is, because I think that kind of brings to light this whole notion of the journey, the mind states, and all of that stuff.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. The peak end theory or the peak end rule is basically this idea that the sum or the net sum of your experience boils down to how you felt at the peak and at the end of the journey. So the example I always give, I might have gave this last time I was a guest, so forgive me if I did, is when I went to Machu Picchu just for a vacation. And the peak for me was walking through the gates when I got to Machu Picchu. And then at the end, I had this like 12-hour flight delay that was a complete disaster. I was like sleeping in the airport. So even when I think back, that was, I mean, 8 or 9 years ago now. When I think back to that, I think about walking through the gates at Machu Picchu and I think about that layover. I wish I didn't think about the layover, the delay or whatever it was. So that's kind of the idea, right? So when we apply this to a client or anybody that's going through some sort of journey, it doesn't just have to be a purchase journey. By the way, we do a lot of like member journey, employee journey, franchisee journey. So other audiences besides just a customer. But what we like to do is map the memorable moments along the journey. So some people call this a moment of truth or, something else where it just is like the specific moment where you either choose a brand, product, or service, or, you receive the thing that you've been waiting for, or you sign up for this specific thing, you get all excited. So those are what we would refer to as memorable moments. And I think the way that we've found makes a lot of sense for our clients is, again, quantifying the emotions that they feel at each stage. So we know, it can, I think a lot of companies do this, but they're not able to more precisely, put the number behind it and quantify it the way we are. So they might be like, oh, the customer feels happy, the customer feels upset during this stage or whatever. We're able to quantify it a little bit more precisely. And then again, when you apply it to different segments, that's where you can see, okay, this segment's having a great journey. This segment's like really annoyed. They're really frustrated. They're having some other things going on. So let's dig in. Let's talk to some folks that are in that segment so we can, uncover and explore what exactly is driving those unpleasant emotions. So I think the whole peak end theory has been a great framework for us when we think about the peak, the end, the memorable moments. We've also incorporated the trigger point as another memorable moment. So what's the exact trigger point that somebody chooses to interact with that specific product? And then there's also some work out of Northwestern University called brand dialogue behaviors. So that's another interesting aspect to it at the very beginning, before that trigger point. What are the kind of implicit awareness things that you've got going on with that brand, product, or service before you are even in the category? So I always talk about swim school because we just did this great study a couple years ago for the swim school, but I maybe am not a parent with little kids that needs a swim school, but if I drive past a swim school every day on my way to work, I'm aware of that brand. So to what degree does that awareness drive my ultimate purchase decision when I am looking, if it's 5-10 years later for a swim school for my kids? So it's things like that that I think we've been trying to map to the peak end theory and customer journey and understanding the emotions by segment that really helps to be more specific with some of those, action items, Curtis, like you were talking about. What do we do about it? I don't want this report to just sit on a digital shelf. I want to actually activate it and do things and improve, our customers' experience.
We just had a similar experience, Tom, with a client recently where he said, "Oh, we've been running these ads for the last 6-8 months, whatever it's been. Do we need new creative?" And you and I, maybe I think you agreed with me. We pushed back a little bit and said, "Well, while we were running those ads, we were actually kind of out of market. most of your customers weren't necessarily ready to purchase. We were out of season, but now you're in season. And so I think I hear what you're saying is, Emily, is like, as you're driving by that swim school, subconsciously, you're getting good impressions, good feedback of, hey, it's clean outside. There's lots of cars in the parking lot. This seems like a good place, but I'm not in market right now. But then as soon as you become in market, those subconscious feelings, whatever, they now come to the surface. So now I see that ad again when it's in season. And I'm like, oh, you know what? I had good experiences or good feelings, really, when I was watching their commercials before. Maybe I should buy from them and not from somebody else. Is that
Yeah. Well, and also just the awareness and familiarity with it, right? As opposed to going out and doing research, you might already be biased in favor. So even if you do say, okay, I'm going to go look at 3 different swim schools, I really am most familiar with this one because I've driven past it, 1,000 times. So
right?
I'm probably not it's gonna hold a little bit more weight for me than the other ones that I just cold am Googling, swim schools near me. So it just kind of holds a little bit more, I think, in that really early decision process, holds a little bit more weight.
Yeah, and to Curtis's point about the report not sitting in the drawer, one of my favorite expressions that I hear the Martech folks bandy about quite a bit is "so what" and "now what." Right? So you get this report, we got all this great data, and like you have to answer the question "so what" first, and then "now what." So can you talk to the "so what" for a little bit, but then segue into what are the things you could do? So now you know all this stuff. You've got this complexity now mapped out in, it's starting to make sense like the beautiful mind. But then like what can you do with this information? It's not just about changing your ad copy, right? So first of all, so what? What does that mean? So what?
Okay, well, I'm gonna back you up one step because it's what and then so what and now what. And I do feel like a mini Chuck Bean talking about this. Chuck's one of the partners at Martech who is always harping on us to make sure that this is central to our messaging with our clients. But so step one is what. So that's what did we hear? Like what is going on? What, right? And then number 2 would be so what? So what does it mean? So what did we learn? So take it one step further. Okay, so I'll just spitball an example here, 60% of people feel happy about that. Okay, that's the what. The so what would be like, okay, so what does that mean for us? What are we going to do about it, right? Like, what are we going to tell the client? So what's the implication of that factor figure? And then the now what, which is step 3, would be now what are we going to do about it? So now let's put together an action plan. So if we have 60% of people feel happy, we want it to be 75. Now what are our steps we're going to take to make that happen and change that metric? Just as an example.
I'm going to nerd out then on an acronym, which I've brought up on the show before. So this sounds a lot like my OODA loop. Do you remember the OODA loop, Tom?
Yeah,
Put you
but
on
I
the
don't,
spot.
it sounded like you were yodeling. So I don't know exactly what the acronym stands for.
Uh, again, I'll remind you, it was invented by a Top Gun pilot, actually instructor, Top Gun instructor, little Tom Cruise there, but it wasn't Tom Cruise. Orient, side, and act, and that's a loop. And it was taught to fighter pilots during Korea to uh, basically their hand-eye coordination, their ability to make decisions in microseconds, really. And so is this, you have all your instrument panel, you're looking out the window, you're taking in all this data, and you have to take that data in, you have to orient yourself around that data. What does it mean? Where am I at? What's my altitude? What's my pitch? Where's the enemy? How much ammo do I have? And you have to repeat those decisions over and over and over and over and over again. And that's life or death. And for me in marketing, it was just a concept that I could say, look, marketing's the same way. We observe what's happening in the marketplace, what's happening with our advertising, what's happening on the website. We have to then say, like you're saying, okay, we got that data. What does it mean? Orient ourselves around it. Then we have to make a decision what we're going to do with it. But then there's that act part. You can't just make a decision in your head, say, yeah, let's go implement it, and then never actually follow through. And what I liked about it was the accountability part of it. It's like, well, the act part somebody has to be accountable to the decision that is made. And then there's the loop is, okay, now we're going to hold that person accountable because there's going to be a part in the process. We're going to come back to these numbers and see what actually happened after the decision was implemented. I like it. And I think maybe Chuck was rubbing off on me because I've gotten to know Chuck a little bit over the last couple of years. And this happened with I'll just name him because he's been on the podcast 5 times. And I'm sure I'll be on again soon. Mario. When we handed Mario a brand voice that we did, researched his competitors, researched his ideal customer, surveyed his existing customers, put this all together. And when we gave him the brand document, he was like, great, project's done. And that I had that first inclination of like, now what? It was like he thought it was done. And I was like, no, how do we put this into action? Like this was just the first step. And I feel like that is the attitude I want to start taking when it comes to these types of reports and the things that we're now starting to do, Tom, with clients is to like, yes, okay, we have this piece of paper. Now what do we do with it? And there's easier ways of putting it into action than putting into a filing cap that we do have. I'll bring it up for the first time in this call today, AI, that we can, and I'm sure you're starting to dabble on this, Emily, where we can give the data to AI, get some insight out of it that might tell us what to do and how we can take action on it and those types of things to bring more meaning to it.
Yeah, I think AI is great at brainstorming, and I think AI is great at like organizing or structuring, but I do think there's just such an element of understanding the business case and really understanding what the human experience is going to be, especially for something if we're talking like customer journey tweaks or experience tweaks, that knowing how a human being will react to something is an important layer, right? That we can't forget. It's like I use AI all the time for helping me think of new ideas or, organize some type of thing, but it's not the best yet, and maybe it'll get there someday, at actually understanding what a human being might be thinking or going through when they're, making a purchase or going through some journey. So I'm glad you brought it up. It's certainly a tool that we're using all the time. It's just not at the moment the end all be all.
Yeah, and I think it's a tool, and what we're starting to see is, I guess, in the enforcement side. So once you do the research, now you could let's say we live in a world where AI has that research that you did. The marketing people, the sales people, whoever in the organization are now using tools with AI that is grounded in that research. So as they're getting feedback from their AI, it's grounded in the research that Martech has done. And so it's going to say, hey, wait, I see that that campaign you want to do isn't grounded in the emotional intelligence we've done. What if you think about it this way and
Yeah.
position it this way?
I can give you a good example of that. So we did a study, a segmentation study a couple years ago for a company that makes HR software, and they wanted to learn more about, the different types of buyers that could potentially buy HR software. So we ended up doing like a jobs to be done segmentation. So what we were looking at was what do the buyers need? What jobs, right? Is the HR software going to do for that buyer? Like, what are their biggest needs in terms of like functions of the software? So that's how we ultimately ended up segmenting it because it made the most sense for like the client's strategy. And it had implications on the sales team afterwards. So now the sales team's equipped with, okay, if these are the 3 primary things that this lead that I'm talking to needs, and now I know that they're in segment 1 and they're going to need these other, like I have way more information on them once I'm able to typify them into a segment. So this was pre-AI. I think this was like 2 or 3 years ago. But now with AI, imagine how much deeper, that how much more informed that salesperson can have that conversation with that lead. So, okay, you need these 3 things. Now I know so much more about you and it's like readily available. And I've got a tool that can help, while I'm live having this conversation with you, it can pull up all this additional information that I know is going to resonate. I know it's going to, hit right in your sweet spot because I know so much more about you now that I've identified these 3 things that you need. So I love thinking about things like that, which we haven't quite gotten there yet, but I'm excited about that coming in the future.
I wanted to go back to the OODA loop now that I remember what it is. And I thought this would be a fun exercise. I just thought of this. So I'm going to put you guys on the spot. So let's do kind of a lightning round where for the business owner or leadership team member who says, I don't want another report that sits in a file cabinet somewhere. What do I do with this? Well, let's think of all the things in hypothetical, what you could do with this information if you had it. So the obvious one, I'll go first and I'll go second, give you guys a chance to think about it. The obvious thing is, okay, we take this information and now we use it to tweak our marketing. Either our messaging is going to change, where we target people, how we target them, where we target them, the marketing strategy changes. That seems to be the easy and obvious. But what if the data showed that when inbound calls go to an Emily or a Chuck, 60 to 70% of the time, those lead to opportunities. But when somebody calls the front desk, only 20% of those lead to opportunities. What would you do with that data? I know the first thing Curtis would do is say, what are you using to track those calls? Nothing. So what's happening on those phone calls? We don't know. Well, what if you did know, right? Because that's one of the lessons that Mario took. But he was, forgive me, Mario, aghast at what he was hearing on those transcripts at the beginning. But this is now just not just a marketing thing. Now this is a sales and service thing. So that piece of data, if you're brave enough to go out and find it, can really be game changing. So that's one example. Who wants to go next? What else could you do with the perfect data set? Give us some now what's, Emily.
You really are putting me on the spot, Tom. I think that the best now what's usually, at least in the journey segmentation research that we do, often are very easy communication tweaks. So to your example of like, okay, front desk gets the call, who's answering it? How do they sound when they're answering it? What are they saying? Are they hanging up on the person? And so we've seen this play out in a very simple way with really easy tweaks to communication or responsiveness. So like we had a client, we found out during one of our segmentation and journey projects that, you know, their customers or their leads would go in and fill out an online form and they would not get any kind of response and it wasn't like, give me a quote. It was like, I'm interested in your, you know, service. And nobody was following up with them for like weeks or not at all, which is crazy to think about, right? So it's like those small things where once you have that information, then now what almost becomes apparent. It's like, well, somebody needs to be following up with them. So let's design a system where now they're getting a follow-up within 24 hours instead of weeks or nothing at all.
Right.
That was pretty close to another example I had, Curtis, is so let's say you're selling a subscription service and you get a high conversion rate, but then a very quick churn rate. And you don't know why. And you assume, oh, my product's no good or whatever. But maybe you go and you survey or you have conversations with these people. And we found out that the purchase was an emotional one. And they were super excited to join this gym or do whatever because they felt good about what was going to come next. And then interest waned or whatever. And then we started seeing this drop off. And I'm not even getting the use out of this, so I'm going to cancel. Well, that's intelligence that you would want to know so that you could construct a customer experience that prevents that churn, right? So that's not necessarily a marketing tactic. It's a retention tactic. But again, it's customer intelligence you need to have.
Yeah. And I think the other thing with that too is having that further intelligence or data to understand what are the signals that are leading to that potential churn, right? Are there other metrics we can look at that would indicate churn is coming soon so that you can have a point of intervention before, right? Which would be another operational thing, right? Because it would be, how are we going to keep this person coming back to the gym and not get them to churn? So you're totally right. There's implications, I think, for marketing, for strategy. We do a lot of work in private equity and mergers and acquisition. So a lot of, you know, go, no go on a buying decision. So things like that are really come out of customer data all the time because it really does inform you the foundational, what's going on with your customer base? What are they looking for? It's the very basic, you know, are you meeting the needs of your customer is like business 101, right?
All right,
Yeah, I
Curtis.
guess getting out of, I'll give it an example, maybe two. The first one that comes to mind is our client who we did some brand research for, who realized that what the business owner and key people who were generating the leads, what they were saying with prospects, and then what the inside sales was actually saying and selling was something completely different. And so that sort of became uncovered in the interview process, but then really came forward when we went from like brand development and integration, and we started to look at their proposals and their presentations on the sales side. We said, wait, business owner, what you said your value was that you provide and what you're currently communicating to bring people into the door, something completely different than what your salespeople are actually selling. And that is why your close rate is so bad right now. And the unlock for him from a data perspective to bring this back to, so now what, has been in the transcripts of the sales conversations now. So we did a lot of data analysis from the transcripts of our interviews and those types of things. And now what he's doing is transcribing every single call that his salespeople have with prospects. He's then taking those transcripts, just like the transcript you would have at a front desk, but it's how did the pitch go? How did, the proposal presentation go? How did the discovery go? Whatever those things are, he's now synthesizing all that data, ingesting it into a central AI that he's trying to train on the way that he would sell, that then he can coach and give feedback to his sales team because he can't be in every room and every presentation all the time, to try to equip them to win more deals. And so I think that's a really good example of like, okay, what's broken? What can we do differently with this data that we received? And how can I take some sort of action on it? And I kudos to him for just taking his own responsibility and accountability, not just saying like, hey, sales team, go fix this problem. You're losing all my deals I'm bringing to the table. He's taking some ownership to it and saying, yeah, there's some things maybe I need to some transfer of knowledge that I have, some, insight that I might have and how we're going to win that I can share with you guys. And let's do that.
I just wanted to comment because as you were saying this came to mind. I think who you're talking about. And so for your benefit, Emily, the business owner on the front end of a potential deal meets the prospect at a point of anxiety. So the peak feeling is, oh my gosh, if I don't stop this neck from bleeding, I'm going to literally die. And this person has this wonderful gift for just saying, we know how that feels. We do this all the time. We've got it. I'm going to introduce you to Jim. Jim's going to take care of it. Everything's going to go away. And then Jim or someone like Jim comes in and oversells, overinforms, puts all this complexity on the table, and so when they don't close, it's always, we know you were the most smart, but I don't think we were ready for you yet. So the end was complexity and fear of the unknown, where the peak went from anxiety to calm. Like, I think that those two things don't match. And I think that's why the close rate is what it is. So did you have another example, Curtis? Or
Well, no, the other sort of simplified one that I was thinking of was the example that I started out the podcast talking about, which, they're getting these signups and then nobody's purchasing. And I was thinking about what Emily was sharing here with this peak emotion thing that you just mentioned. And it's like, if they really understood how they could get, because most of these people are buying from a competitor already. They're not new to the market. They've got to take market share from somebody else. And so to understand what would make that person want to switch, which is likely the economical part of it, again, is probably a very small percentage, that there likely is an emotional part to that switch. Uncovering that and then just simply figuring out a way to weave that into the email sequence that happens after somebody signs up and gets approved for their account would likely be a huge win. So just simple communications in that follow-up. And I say simple in the sense that it's not simple to figure out exactly what it is, but once you figure it out, you're going to realize probably how simple that was. And I think this comes back, Tom, to our mirror marketing versus window marketing, that you're so in your business that you just have this reflection of yourself all the time. It's we's, it's ours, it's, and you just can't see it from your customer's perspective. And like you started this out saying, we know our customers already. We don't need to
the
ask.
business 100 years. There's nothing you can't tell them.
And so I think my next question for Emily is like, so how frequently do you need to do these surveys? Because we're living in a world, I think, where things change so rapidly that we don't stay grounded in behaviors or emotions and those types of things for a long period of time anymore. Like the world is just moving so fast, technology and, all these different things. And so, um, those emotions are going to change. So how frequently do you recommend to a company to say, or do you have systems that say, look, we can do a bigger project here, but let's make sure over time that we stay aligned. So maybe you do check-in surveys or those types of things. What does that typically look like for Martech? What do you recommend?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and I mean, nobody can predict what's going to happen. Nobody knew we were going to have a global pandemic, right? Those types of things happen where it completely reorients so many things. AI, right? Like these things are changing the way people buy and interact with brands, work from home. Like, so we have so many clients where, 2 years ago, we might have done something really meaningful, a great segmentation journey study, but then all of a sudden a new entrant comes in or a new product, or we have, a whole new way of doing business with hybrid work, or we have AI that's changing how people are searching. Like right now, we're seeing so many things where traditionally people obviously Google a lot when they're researching things, but now for the first time, we've been incorporating I ask ChatGPT or Claude for recommendations when I'm purchasing an HR software, for example. So I think I don't want to put a hard and fast rule on it, but I would say every few years, I think it's really important. And then the maintenance sort of upkeep in between could be a really easy internal exercise of just doing customer interviews, right? To your point, there's a little bit of, I think, bias doing that yourself just because you might hear what you're looking for or you might ignore what you don't want to hear, right? So there's always beauty in having somebody else do it for you if you can afford it. But I would say the absolute minimum is to do a program of customer interviews, whether it's 5, 10, 100, depending on what your customer base looks like every year, just to help keep your team apprised of, okay, this is what our customers are thinking. This is what they're feeling. These are their stressors. This is how we know they make purchase decisions. That type of stuff's invaluable. And then maybe every 3, 4, 5 years, again, depending on how disrupted your market becomes in that time, having a fresh look at a full segmentation, I think is helpful. And the other thing too with segmentation is you can segment on so many different variables. So you can segment like B2B buyers on firmographics. So how big is the company? What end market are they in? That kind of thing. Consumers, you could segment on demographics, like suburban mom in their 30s is a specific target we need, or psychographics, behaviors. There's also things like occasion. So the example I like to give here is beer. So say we're working for a beer brand, you might buy like a fancy beer to have at home if it's just you drinking a 6-pack and you're like, okay, I'm going to buy the nice thing. But if you're going to a tailgate, you're probably getting like a bigger case and you're going to get a lower end beer, right? At least in my experience. So understanding things like occasions, emotions, there's so many ways. And I think that what's important is matching it to what your client needs. So if your client is looking for, I need, to develop our next gen product, we're probably going to be looking more heavily at things like features or pricing or willingness to pay, or, what exactly people like. Needs-based segmentation obviously is like the king, but um, depending on what the company needs for their strategy is going to have implications on the way we end up doing it. And that type of thing might change over time too. So it could be 5 years ago, they did want to do a more basic demographic thing to like target specific people, but now they're more sophisticated. They've got other things beyond just direct mail or whatever, where they're like, okay, now we're going to work on our next gen product. So now we need to know more about, okay, we know our ICP. Let's look at how exactly they perceive different features so we know which features we want. It's stuff like that where that type of thing changes all the time. So that constant 3-5 year cycle, I think, is really important.
So, Emily, last question. So let's pretend, for example, that we've convinced people, first of all, that either their marketing has drifted from strategy or their market has maybe drifted from them, the brand. They concede that most purchase decisions are emotional and not rational. They concede that we don't know the answers to what we don't know. So we're willing to go find out. We gave people episode 1, we gave people the homework Curtis to go talk to 5 of their customers, and I predicted that no one would do the homework. So raise your hand if you've done it. No, I see no hands raised in the classroom today. So perfect timing. Emily, my question is, if they're going to do this, I'm sure the large corporations, Curtis mentioned surveys. So I would imagine large corporations who can afford it, the best case scenario you tell me would be a combination of survey and then maybe more quant research interviews. Is that the case? But what does a minimum viable sort of product look like to understand these things?
Yeah, the minimum viable definitely depends on the size of the organization. So for a small company, you've got a handful of big customers talking with each of them, like literally a one-on-one interview with maybe somebody who's not their main point of contact. So it's at least somewhat neutral. It's free to do this. Have somebody else in the organization talk to them about what they need. Are they getting the service they require? What sorts of things are going on in their organization that might have implications on their relationship with you. We do that kind of thing for customers a lot when they do want to outsource it and they have the means to do that. But I think the absolute minimum is talking one-on-one interview, set up an hour, go grab coffee, grab lunch if you're nearby, go see them, right? Show that you care. But I think that's the absolute minimum. For bigger organizations that have, unlimited budget or unlimited customer base, my, preferred option would be a qual approach. So qualitative interviews up front, understand kind of the context of the situation, make sure you get all kinds of different customers represented. We often will do current customers, lapsed customers, competitive customers, all kinds of different viewpoints. Then we'll go into survey mode, do a really big survey, that's statistically significant to make sure we have confidence and validation in some of the conclusions that we draw from that. We also need, you typically rule of thumb is at least about 800 to do a statistically significant segmentation study specifically. And then we like to double that if we can, of course, depending on the buyer type. And then the back end would be more qualitative. So this would be if you're doing segments, bringing them to life. So kind of like what we're doing right now, a one-on-one. Tell me more about why you think the way you think, Mr. Representative of segment number 2. Tell me more about your purchase behaviors. Tell me more about the emotions and motivators you have that are going on in your life, the stressors, the things that are happening in your life that are impacting your purchase. Or again, we're focusing a lot on purchase. It's not always purchase. It's a sign up or, those other types of things too. So my personal favorite is always that qual approach because you're really not leaving anything on the table. You're covering all of your bases. You're getting really great, rich data from the qual, but you're also getting that validation and the confidence around the numbers from the quantitative portion of that research.
Love that. Cool. Well, Emily, thanks for being on the podcast and telling us what we don't know. We're going to do a now what, Curtis. So let's assume that now we've got all this information and we know what the emotional drivers are of purchases or signups or retentions or whatever. How do you then connect your brand to those authentic emotions? That's where we're going next. And it's one of your new favorite pet buzzwords. Should we reveal it?
Well, I don't know where you're going. I've got a lot of buzzwords lately. I'll let you say it because it's on your mind, and maybe it's going to tie to what I want to say here. But and for those who are listening, who are maybe saying, look, I can't afford this. My feeling would be you might not be able to afford not to. I think I have some double negatives in there. So, Mr. English major, I maybe didn't say that accurately, but let's just say you're spending $120,000 a year in marketing. And let's just say that 50% of that is misaligned because you might only be looking at one persona who might only be 10% of your audience. And the rest of your marketing is just falling flat because it's not speaking to the right drivers and motivators of your target customer. So that's $60,000 that's wasted spend that you're not doing effectively. So this research is really foundational and because becomes an investment into the output that you're going to get later. Right. And I think a lot of times business owners blame failure on execution. And they might actually have good executors, whether it's the agency running your advertising, whether it's the guy building your landing page. They're doing the best with the information that they have.
Amen.
But they could do better if they had information that was grounded in who your customer is, and you were able to clearly articulate to them that says, you know what, we know why people buy from us, and here's what we're trying to communicate. And if we do this successfully and the algorithm's in our favor, may the odds be forever in your favor. Yeah, then in all likelihood, you'll probably get people to buy. But you could have the best execution in the world, the best landing pages, the best ad copy, all these things. But if it falls flat, you're just throwing it out the window.
Yeah, you're in trouble.
And the problem lies in the strategy, not in the execution at that point, right? So, all right, well, I'll reveal where we're going, Curtis. You should know this. But before I do, let's thank Emily for being here. We will put all your contact information in the show notes. So follow her on LinkedIn, contact her at martechgroup.com. Those links are in the show notes. So now what? Curtis, so if you want to emotionally connect with somebody in an authentic way that is going to tug on whatever emotion you find out in the research you need to tug on. It could be heartstrings, it could be fear, it could be opportunity, it could be excitement, it could be anger. Well, let me just put it this way. I love a good story. See you next time on Bullhorns and Bullseyes.